Hello and welcome to the Homeless Consultant channel. My name is Paul B. I am the Homeless Consultant. Today I want to tell you something that as of today, Monday, October 18th, I believe, as of today, the Minnesota news media hasn't bothered to tell the people of Minnesota, 5.5 million people or so. The rest of the world seems to be aware of this, but when you have a news media who's trying to push a heavily leftist agenda, they're generally not going to tell the people anything bad about leftists and communists and globalists and socialists or any of these ists, people who waste their entire existence trying to take control over everyone else's life. Specifically, if you do a search on the Star Tribune, for example, you'll get, some stories about communist China, but generally they're going to be neutral or even positive, if you can imagine that. Of course, the people who run the Star Tribune, they're not living in China, and their family members are not being pulled out of their homes in the middle of the night and taken off to a re-education camp or shot in the head or just disappear from the face of the earth forever without a trace. That's not happening to their families, so they're perfectly content to give high praise to China over here to the Minnesotans. So I guess it's up to, once again, the homeless guy sitting in a car to tell the people of Minnesota, at least, what the rest of the world, who's paying any attention at all, already knows, which is that China, apparently, in August, more or less successfully tested a hypersonic missile. You remember the Concorde, that airplane with the crooked front nose? Or no, I guess it's the only nose it has, the crooked nose. The Concorde, it was a supersonic jet. It could go past the speed of sound. That's why it would go boom, like my neighbors did. Concorde basically had to stop operations, mainly because everywhere it went boom, boom, because there's actually two sonic booms when it passes by you. Hypersonic means it's even faster, a lot faster. It means that it's about 5 times the speed of sound here in this case. So China, and I've heard two different reports. One is that it landed about 2 miles from its target. The other is that it landed about a couple dozen miles from its target, whatever that means, 24 miles, something like that. Doesn't really matter though. If the thing's carrying a hydrogen bomb, it's still going to blow up everything in the area, right? What's the difference between the missile hitting Manhattan or Yonkers? All of New York City is gone either way. It doesn't really matter. This is kind of big news because the other half of the story is that the American military, which is focused on things like how many rainbow colors they can put in their flag, and we have to be diverse, and all this woke idiocy. While our military's dealing with that, apparently they were caught completely off guard, and they didn't have the foggiest idea that China had any remote capability to build a hypersonic missile that is capable of carrying a nuclear tip. I said it in another video, didn't I, that China is training its military to kill, to conquer. That's what it's training its military to do. We are training our military, bless their hearts. I love our military. It's not their fault. It's the leadership upstairs. And these poor, wonderful military personnel are being dragged along with it into this idiocy of wokeness. And you just tell me which army, if Alexander the Great's army had gone in that direction, would they have accomplished what they did? Not at all. They would have lost their first fight instead of conquering the world. What would have happened to the Roman army if they were worried about which personal pronoun you're using for the guy next to you? We wouldn't have had a Roman Empire, period. And we're not going to have an American empire or even just a United States of America, one out of many countries in the world that is strong and prosperous and a good place to live for its people. We're not even going to have that anymore. We're about 20 years away, 25 years away from China's 100th anniversary of its communist takeover. And they have made it clear all along that within 100 years of that, they intend to be the world dominant power. Not the United States. For them to be the dominant power, the United States needs to go away, needs to go somewhere. It either needs to collapse from within and become some kind of a Mad Max, famine-infested death trap where everyone's just dying and fighting each other, which is where we're headed. Or if China chose to, as I'm going to show you here in a moment, China could wipe us out in one day, and the United States of America would be over and done with. And one of the main reasons for it is because for any of the scenarios that I can think of, if they launch that, what we've got to respond to it is a senile old man who's half asleep. Sometimes he is asleep, even when talking to world leaders at the White House. And this is the person that Minnesotans voted for. They wanted this guy to be the leader of the free world. His vice president is some loopy, just out of her mind valley girl, just pathetic. I mean, no qualifications of any kind to even hold public office, let alone vice president or presidency. And then the third in line is that just whack job Nancy Pelosi. And if you follow the chain down a whole lot further, guess who else you get? People like Ilhan Omar, AOC. That's what we've got right now as the leadership in this country. And that's why China in one day could end the United States of America right now, if they wanted to. And you know what? If they did it, there would be no blowback from the rest of the world against them. In one day, just like, how Afghanistan was taken over by the Taliban in one day, China could, if they wanted to. I'm not saying they want to. I'm not sitting here predicting they're going to do this, because they're already being very successful by taking us down from within. They own the White House right now. If you haven't figured out, it's not the old man who's asleep and living in La La Land who's running this country right now. It is not him. In case you haven't figured it out, maybe you need to put your eyes on and open them and look around. It seems kind of obvious, doesn't it? This is Barack Obama's third term with some help from the Clintons. The Clintons, you remember when Bill Clinton became president, when he took over in '93, immediate scandal, which should have been an impeachment and probably should have taken him out of office before he even got the seat warm. Chinagate. Chinagate. See, at that time, China was basically a giant rice paddy. They didn't have much going on. They had 1 billion people. They had a one-child policy, so everyone would abort their little girls. So now you got 1.5 billion people over there leaning really far toward the male side. Yes, folks, there are only two genders. Just look inside your pants and you'll figure that out. There's only two. A whole bunch of men over there who have no hope of ever having a woman because their parents killed them all because of a one-child policy. They have nothing better to do than to join, say, a 200 million man army and go out and die for their country. Because they're not going to go out and get a girl, are they? Or they could go conquer another country and just take a woman, rape her, assault her, things like that, like so many vicious, violent armies do. The American Army has always been very much a role model. It's not to say you haven't had those cases here and there in World War II, Vietnam. You have, unfortunately. But as an institution, those kinds of horrific behaviors of raping and pillaging, snatching children, things like that, that is done by really vicious, barbaric, medieval, evil countries. And China fits that bill perfectly. Don't let the fact that it's run by Winnie the Pooh fool you. This thing's more vicious than anything we've seen since the ancient world. The ancient, uncivilized, barbaric world. That's China. But when Bill Clinton took over the White House, he had to pay back the people who gave him all the money to get elected in the first place, who, hey, what do you know, they were Chinese. What a payback they got. That was 30 years ago, folks. Now, China, instead of being a giant rice paddy with this, billion people, which leans heavily toward male only, now you've got about 1.5 billion, or maybe 1.7, 1.8 billion people. Do you understand what that means? That's many times. That's 9, 10 times the number of people in the United States of America. And they have, ever since Bill Clinton, with his trade agreements, like Ross Perot warned in that election, he said, you're going to hear that giant sucking sound that is all the jobs in America go overseas. And once they're overseas and those people are willing to work for 10 cents an hour, Americans are going to have to compete with that. Americans are going to lose all their competitive edge. And that's exactly what happened. But China also, whenever anyone took their manufacturing over there, they required, as a condition of doing that, that we give them our blueprints, our documents, our patent papers, that we basically give them all the information they need to go out and just do it themselves. So Americans over the last 250 years, they worked and they built on the shoulders of giants in science and technology. They did the effort that's necessary to go from the Stone Age to the Space Age. And China just stole it. So in 30 years, instead of doing the actual work that needs to be done, China just suddenly is where we are. Just mysteriously got there without ever doing any actual work to get there. Gee, how did that happen? That would be the Clintons. So since the Clintons basically gave everything to China and correspondingly took it all away from the American people, and he wasn't impeached for that or prosecuted for that, China in 30 years has grown to the level of a nation that actually did do all the work for 250 years, like our ancestors did, and like my generation did. So now they have a hypersonic missile. To my knowledge, even the United States of America has not admitted to having a hypersonic missile. What is a hypersonic missile? What makes that so important? Well, there's only one purpose for it. It's an offensive weapon. It is not a defensive weapon. It is offensive, and it is a first strike weapon. It is meant to deliver a nuclear warhead so fast that the enemy doesn't have time to respond. That is, they don't have time to launch their missiles to destroy the people who sent this missile over here, or at least to do a lot of damage to them, and to come so fast that there's no way our anti-missile defenses don't even have any hope of hitting something that moves that fast. China can send one of these missiles down south instead of sending it over the Great Circle, over the North Pole, which is how you'd normally, if you look at the Earth, the shortest distance between 2 points on a globe is a great circle, not a straight line. That's why when you fly overseas, it goes north. It doesn't just go straight across the ocean. Well, China now can take a hypersonic missile, send it down under the South Pole, and this thing can come up to where we don't even have sensors looking for it or in any great numbers. But don't forget also, one thing China has focused their military on is destroying our capacity to wage war, because in America everything is computerized. So their military, aside from their ground military, is designed to, first of all, take out all of our satellites, and then potentially EMP explosions over the United States, which would knock this camera out. And I hate to tell you this, folks, I know nothing seems to scare anybody here. There's 4 million homeless people living in this kind of misery. That hasn't bothered anybody enough to where they feel compelled to do anything about it. I know we can talk about Joe Biden and what he just did with Afghanistan and how that's going to lead down the road in 10 years, if we still exist, to something like a 9/11 happening every month in the United States of America. Yeah, I can talk about these things, but nobody's getting nervous or scared about it. Nobody understands history or has foresight for the future. So maybe this will jog you and give you some kind of adrenaline rush to understand just how bad things are going to get, folks. An EMP will take out your cell phone. You will not have a cell phone. For all of you who spend your entire day, your entire existence just staring at this idiot box while this universe goes on around you for trillions of light years in every direction, and you just stare at this little box, that thing's no longer going to exist. That's what an EMP does. Does that scare you? Losing your little drug? because that's a permanent loss. You will lose it forever. Just like that, you will have no cell phone. What will you do with your life when you don't have a cell phone anymore? That's what China does. That's their plans for taking us on. Now, there's a whole bunch of scenarios here. You know, military strategists and theorists can, if you go online, you're going to see all kinds of different ideas of how China could attack the United States. First and foremost, I want to say they've already attacked us. We're been under attack for the longest time. This whole coronavirus, where did that come from? As our former president, our last president of the United States of America said, it's the Chinese virus. It came from Wuhan. You see, these people are all together. That's why you're seeing so much focused attention to stop Donald Trump. Focused attention in the media to make sure that all this truth out here you never hear, but you do hear all these lies over here. Because they're all trying to get the globalist, communist, socialist, whatever you want to call it, they're all trying to get this authoritarian nation that they themselves have not lived in yet. And once they get a taste of it, they're going to regret that they spent their lives trying to make sure that their children live under that. That is, if they survive it. Because the first thing that happens in any authoritarian takeover is all the people who helped you get there die. So, Jack over there at Twitter, if the Chinese took over everything, there's a very good chance this kind of thing would happen. Hey, Bill Gates. Hey, Jack, creepy bearded guy from Twitter. Google, come here. We're going to have a meeting. We're going to have a celebration. We did it. We took away that freedom. We took away that autonomy. We took away all that personal responsibility. It's now 1,000 people ruling the world and 8 billion slaves, and there's no external force to rescue them. We did it. Come on, let's party. And when they get there, and Bill Gates and Jack and Nancy Pelosi, and, well, Biden would probably fall asleep. He wouldn't make it that far, but Harris, Clintons would be there in a limousine. Maybe they take Epstein's plane, since Epstein doesn't need it now. And they'd have this big party, and the Chinese government would say, we are so grateful to you. You did perfect job for us. You got us where we needed to be. We were able to take over the United States without even having to go to war against you. Thank you so much for that. No more Bill and Hillary Clinton. No more Jack, the idiot from Twitter. No more leader of Google. No more Bezos. No more of these people at all. No more of these Hollywood celebrities. Because they are what authoritarians call useful idiots. Useful idiots. Thank you, Jack, for censoring Twitter. Thank you for taking the one person who was speaking any sense at all. He might have said it in an angry way, but he was saying it the truth. And he was the leader of the free world and had every right and responsibility to do that. Thank you, Jack, for making sure he could never tell anybody the truth ever again. You know why? Because when you're an authoritarian, you use idiots to get your power built up, but because they were a part of it, and there's even the sliver of a chance that one of them could knock you off your throne, you kill them. That's what authoritarians always do. That's why every time there's a communist takeover, there's a bloodbath. Every time. Or even a Nazi takeover, socialist. Authoritarian, either way. Doesn't matter if it's nationalist or not. That's not the point. The point is, you enlist stupid people to do your work, to put their necks on the line, to put their wealth and their fortunes on the line, and then they either succeed or fail, or they might go to prison for treason, for example. That's not going to happen here, as it should, but they might. You're sitting there running the show, pulling the strings. These people are so powerful that they might even call George Soros in to thank him, and then... If you think George Soros is the guy at the top, you don't understand how this world works. He's toward the top, very much toward the top, but he ain't at the top. Governor Tim Walz, as soon as this ridiculous coronavirus health scare began, less than a month later, he's already talking about mail-in voting for an election that wasn't taking place for another 9 or 10 months. doing his part to ensure that the election would be rigged. To get rid of the one person who was challenging and fighting and trying to expose China. Hey Tim Waltz, we're having a party. Come on over. We want to thank you for what you did for us. Useful idiots. So in that sense, China doesn't need to take us over militarily. They are doing a fantastic job of doing everything subversively that you need to do to take over a country. In fact, you know what? Look in the show notes for here. I'm going to give you a link to... This is a former KGB agent back in early 1980s. It's a talk that he gave. He gave a lot of talks back then. And I'm not trying to play this guy up as the be-all, end-all of this, but listen to what he says and remember that it was 35 to 40 years ago that he said it. He defected to America. Defected. This is when the Soviet Union was still in power. And he explained how the KGB, while all this theater was going on with warfare and threats of war and rumors of war, the real action was being taken subversively. Exactly what McCarthy was trying to stop with McCarthyism. The KGB all along had intended to take over the United States internally through subversiveness. And what are subversives? They are useful idiots. They're people who you brainwash. They're people who you take over the education system and you mold them throughout their education so that they can't think properly. They can't think independently. They have no critical thinking skills. They're stupid. They fall for mind-bogglingly insane stuff like this woke agenda, instead of worrying about anything that actually does matter in this universe. So they're neutralized. They're useless human beings because they're worried about the color of flags and personal pronouns. They're not a risk to stopping anybody who's actually doing something in this world, like trying to take over the world, for example. So look in the show notes and listen to that speech and just listen to what he's saying 35, 40 years ago and ask, was he right? Because back then a lot of people said, oh, you're crazy. And it's like right now it reads, it's like he's giving a history lecture. He tried to tell us, and so did I, by the way, throughout the 90s, the 2000s, 2010s. Nobody listened to me either. So China basically has us already, but if for some reason China wanted to take us over militarily, they could do it in one day. I'll just give you off, and I'm not a super military expert. I've studied a lot of military history, but I don't claim to be remotely an expert. My life has been devoted to fighting domestic enemies, where I get no pension, I get no stars, no stripes, I get no rank, I get no respect, I don't get a parade. The people like me who have spent our entire adult lives fighting against domestic enemies like this, we just die in obscurity. We don't get buried in Arlington. But because I do what I do, I have that much respect for the people in our military who fight the same way against foreign enemies. Foreign and domestic enemies. But as it turns out, over the last 30 years, it wasn't foreign enemies we had to worry about. It was domestic enemies, the ones I was fighting against. The ones who were winning. The ones who are in control now, when they should have been put in a prison decades ago. But everyone was asleep. If China wanted to take us over militarily, here's just off the top of my head, I'm not even thinking about it. Let's say they send 2 hypersonic missiles down by the South Pole. By the time it's even detected that these things are on their way, somebody has to figure out what's going on, which takes time. Might take 5 minutes, might take 10 minutes. You're talking about a missile that might take, what, an hour or 2 to get here? 5 or 10 minutes that is gone while someone in the Pentagon just figures out what's going on. Then they have to get in touch with the leader of the free world, if they can wake this guy up and inject enough drugs in him so that he's remotely coherent. Okay, that's probably going to take about 20 minutes just to get that guy to where his fog is gone enough to even listen to what these people have to say. And they will say, sir, We've detected launches of hypersonic missiles. They appear to be headed our way from China. They could arrive as soon as 40 minutes, 60 minutes from now. What should we do? And then this senile old fool has to try to figure out what to do. Do I, based on what I just heard, do I grab the nuclear football and do I respond and blow Beijing out of the water so Beijing no longer exists? Is that what I do? Or should I take a little more time to make sure I understand what the real problem is here? Now, I would argue to you that the former president, the real president, he would have had people in charge who already knew what was going on, so that he could be told and make a rational decision right then and there. They wouldn't have to sit there and run around and go, what's happening? What's happening? Like they did with, Afghanistan, for example. And in the 40 to 60 minutes while they're all running around going, what's happening? What's happening? We don't know. 2 missiles come over the central and the mid-central U.S., like over Colorado, over Arkansas. 2 EMPs. Immediately, most of the electronics in the United States of America are gone. Your phone, your drug is gone. And you're sitting there going, and you're starting to, I can't check Twitter. I just left I want to see how many thumbs up I got. I don't know what to do. I mean, that's what Americans are going to be like. But all of our weapons, defenses, radar, gone. All of our communications, gone. Television, radio, gone. Our military is all based on electronics. For the most part, gone. Gas pumps to put gas in your car, they're run by computers. Gone. Your car is run by computers. Gone. That's with 2 EMPs that didn't even land on the ground. Those blow up in the air. Okay, trailing behind that are a couple more missiles. Now, how many? I don't know. It depends on what China would want to do. But I would suspect one of them would head for San Diego and take out the naval base. These would be either tactical nukes or full-on nukes. So San Diego could disappear. That's 1.5 million people gone just like that, including what essentially amounts to the command and control for our Pacific Fleet. Because if you haven't been paying attention, if you've been watching the Minnesota news media, you may not be aware that China has been taking over the Pacific Ocean the last several years. Another thing that President Trump warned us about. You remember when Donald Trump told us he's forming a new branch of our military called Space Force? And everyone laughed at it. Oh, it's comic book. This is exactly what Space Force was designed to prevent and to stop. You see, he knew what he was doing. But we're not going to have this now, are we? We're not going to have it. 2 EMPs take out most of the electronics in America. Everything just shuts down and stops. You think the shutdown for coronavirus was spooky and scary and surreal? Wait until there's a real shutdown where you can't go anywhere else. It isn't that you've decided you don't want to. I'm going to be obedient to these stupid authorities. Now, you can't even if you want to. Because when you get in the car, nothing happens. There's nothing there. Your phone doesn't work. You may never talk to your family ever again if they live in other states. You may never hear from them ever again because it ain't going to be the mail service that's keeping you in touch with them. Your life will change completely just like that. Just like my life changed when I moved in this car. But am I supposed to care about that if it happens to you? Nobody has cared that happened to me. And yet here I am, trying to warn you about this so that you won't experience what I did. Having your whole life destroyed in an instant, and yet surviving to suffer in that kind of misery year after year after year. Or in this case, for a couple months before everybody pretty much dies. You see, when nothing works, and given the scenario I'm going to give you in a second, there's going to be famine, there's going to be basically civil war, and there's going to be something else coming up. So China. 2 EMPs to take out everything. That's the initial attack. We no longer have information. We no longer have communications. We don't even really have transportation. Or at least it's severely disrupted. Nationwide, coast to coast. They send another missile over and they take out San Diego, take out the naval base. They take out a couple more bases. They're going to hit Florida. Now, whether they would hit New York City or Chicago, that depends on what they're trying to do. One bomb and 8 million people in New York City gone in an instant. One flame, they're gone. They don't exist anymore. Chicago, what is it? Chicago, I believe 4 million? 4 million? Gone. What else is in there? The New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ in Chicago. So, if China wanted to take out New York City, it could be to take out the New York Stock Exchange, to take out the United Nations. It could be just to take out such a power center. You've got so much money and so much influence in business. You take out New York City and Chicago, the world economy is ended. And whoever's in charge after that determines what the world economy will be the very next day. That would be China. Russia doesn't have that much power. They have a lot of weapons. They have a leader who walks around with his shirt off, acting tough. But Russia is a dead country. Other than having a whole bunch of really deadly weapons, they've got no power at all. In fact, when Trump was in office, we were energy independent. That was just hurting Russia really bad. We weren't the sole source of it, but their only source of income really is gas. That's really all they've got. And we were energy independent until the very day that this sleepy, senile old fool, basically Obama wearing an old man mask, signed all of those executive orders, basically forming a dictatorship for the first time in American history, just annihilating everything that Trump had accomplished. And one of the things he did was take away deliberately our energy independence. Why would someone do that unless they're trying to destroy a nation? I'll leave for you to try to figure out. Why would you do that? If you have a son or a daughter and they become financially independent, are you going to feel happy for them and feel that they're blessed and give thanks to God that your children have been blessed to be financially independent? Or are you going to say, I think they're going to be better off without it? So you pull some shenanigan that steals all their money and they have to go start working at Walmart to try to put food on the table. Are you going to do that to them? Because that's what this guy did to the whole country here. Why would you do that? Even if you're a leftist moron, I want you to explain to me, why would you do that? It doesn't make any rational sense unless you are trying to destroy your son, your daughter, your country. You're trying to destroy their lives. That's why you would do it. Sometimes the proof is just in what they're doing. You don't need documents. You don't need an independent investigator. You don't need the news media, Geraldo Rivera, to go out and investigate things and to open up Al Capone's vault. You don't need that. Sometimes you can just see what they're doing and figure out what they're doing. The reason that man attacked the people of the United States of America one after another with those executive orders is because he's trying to hurt Americans. He's trying to destroy America. That's what he wants to do. He hasn't done one thing yet that helps this country. And he's done everything he can to hurt it. Going back to what China could do. So you've got EMPs that basically stop the country. Back almost to the Stone Age. We're back to the 1800s. Except we don't really have any horses left to ride on. Because that's what you're going to need. Let's say China decides to take out New York City and Chicago. Okay, what is that? That's 12 million people. So you've taken out, 12 to 15 million people right there. If you take out San Diego with the base, another million. I could see the bombs that are for military purposes to take out our capacity to respond, to attack Beijing or to defend ourselves. it wouldn't take all that many bombs if they know where our stuff is, which they probably do, but they've got their man in office, it doesn't matter. One place I think they probably would not attack is Washington, because they've already got Washington. Why waste a bomb on it? You want to have this cretin in office when there's a national emergency like that. It's the worst thing that could happen to us is to have such a weak leader. That's why they didn't want Trump there. So I can't tell you exactly what they would do, but they would definitely go after our military capacity, our capacity to sense. They would take out all our satellites, which is what China has built their weapons to do. We would be running blind in a huge country that can't anymore, doesn't even have transportation or communication between the coasts, just like the Founding Fathers, where they had to send the Pony Express, and maybe 6 months later they would get a message over to California. That's what we would have. But here's the thing. Without all the farm equipment, without all the stuff working, without the ability to pump gas, without any energy independence of any kind, in fact, really fossil fuels are useless to us because we can't run anything that uses them anymore. We're back to the Stone Age. We're back to the Middle Ages here. How are we going to generate enough food to feed the remaining, I don't know, let's say China only kills about 50 million Americans with its bombs. You still got a good 300 or 350 million people over here. Some of whom are Americans and some of whom are illegals. How are they going to eat? How do you feed 300 million people when your entire infrastructure has been destroyed? It's called famine, folks. And they just sit back, and in about 1 to 3 months, probably half the population of America will be dead. Starvation, disease, internal warfare. Another 3 months later, probably another half of that remaining population gone. Meanwhile, and let's say China did this right away. So the same day that they send this attack, which basically takes us out completely, and we don't even bother responding, just like we didn't respond to Afghanistan or the Taliban. We did nothing because we've got a weak leader who is, again, it's basically Barack Obama and the Clintons wearing a Biden mask. And these people will never, ever, ever bite the hand that feeds them, even though the hand that feeds them is one day going to call them in for a celebration, and it's going to be the last day of their life. But they're too stupid to figure that out, that they are useful idiots. I was president of the United States. I'm not a useful idiot. Yeah. Go on believing that, Barack. Go on believing it, Bill. And in the time you have left, you might want to read some history books, like a homeless guy did. China could launch a flurry of aircraft, paratroopers, okay? They could they could bring 1 or 2 planes full of paratroopers over here. It would take them a couple hours to get here, right? Maybe several hours, but it doesn't matter. We can't stop them anymore anyway. And the whole world's going to be in shock, doing nothing. No one's going to be like actively trying to stop China. China could do whatever they want for many days, probably, not just hours. Because everything's going to be in shock. It's not like Russia's going to stand up and go, well, you can't do that, we're going to stop you, and have a nuclear war between China and Russia. That isn't going to happen. That isn't going to happen. China could do whatever it wanted, because the only ones who could stop it are in the White House, and they are asleep at the wheel. And they are dumb, and they are evil. The good guy who was in the office a year ago is gone. And you let it happen. If China sent, say, 2 planes over with paratroopers, they land them outside, in the San Francisco Bay Area. Within 1 hour or 2 hours, let's say 1 to 3 hours, depending where they land. Within 1 to 3 hours, they would have San Francisco. They would have enough people armed and trained and coordinated with their own communications that work, that they now control San Francisco. Let me ask you a question, folks. How do you take back San Francisco? Now, I understand we don't want San Francisco. I get that. But the fact is, as long as it's on American soil, unfortunately, we have to have San Francisco. I wish I could say, China, take it. It's yours. Please, please. It's going to hurt you. Take it. That's our weapon against you, is you take San Francisco. I wish I could say that. but it's American soil. You can't let them have a foothold like that. That's urban warfare, folks, and we don't have any even, it would be weeks before we could even begin to try to take back San Francisco. By then, they would have even more troops in there. Urban warfare in a center like that with a civilian population, we would never get San Francisco back, is what I'm getting at. Let's say they take a 1-hour drive over to Sacramento. They go over to Sacramento, Pooh Bear himself might even come over there, and guess what's going to happen? Gavin Newsom's going to get out there, and he's going to bow down before Pooh Bear and say, "Where have you been? They almost voted me out of office. I've been waiting for you for so long." And Pooh Bear will say something along the lines of, "Mr. Newsom, you've been such a great help. You gave us California, the 5th largest economy in the world. These people are so dumbed down, they're so trained to have these authoritarians tell them how to live their lives and how to do everything. We don't even, Communist China doesn't even really need to do a whole lot of programming of these people. Thank you so much." Useful idiots. You don't want competition. The useful idiot has to go at that point. Bye-bye, Gavin. That's what would happen. And China would have Sacramento, the capital of California, what used to be the 5th largest economy in the world. And almost our entire West Coast. Meanwhile, they're up there either landing or moving towards Seattle. Now, they would either take out Seattle with a nuke, because Boeing is there, so our ability to build aircraft, military craft, is almost gone immediately, or they would just go in there and take it over, because we have no defense against it. So you can see how easy it would be. In one day, the United States of America would be, every individual who's left alive now has to worry about their daily survival. And it's going to take their entire day to concern themselves with their daily survival. How do I get enough food for today? How do I protect myself from getting shot or killed by these people who think I have food or gold or whatever they think's important? They're neutralized. They're impotent. They can't do anything anymore. Now, as China moves in and starts taking over cities, they don't need many people. They could do it in some of these cities, like a Minneapolis, they could probably do it with 500 soldiers. 500 soldiers! Because, first of all, Minneapolis leans in their direction in the first place. There's all these other useful idiots, stupid people who would sit there and welcome them, or at the very least, they wouldn't fight them. I mean, they didn't even try to stop looting and setting fires and carjackings a year ago. Why would they try to stop the Chinese military? But here's the other thing. Here in Minnesota, they have, to show how diverse they are, they have been bringing over all these Somalis. Right out here, behind where you can see, there's all this housing there. While I live in this car, you can't even count how many of them. Hundreds, thousands? Somalis out there. Living there. They've driving really nice cars, nicer than the one I have. They're sleeping in beds. Yet, I have a hard time seeing where most of them even have a job. Minnesota just gives them everything. Gives them everything. And yet, those people will not integrate with Americans. They won't have anything to do with Americans. They stay by themselves. This is Ilhan Omar's group. There's another group that they brought over here as well, called the Hmong. The Hmong came from, after the Vietnam War in Asia. That group was, ripe for extinction, so they came over here. This has the largest Hmong population in the world, as far as I know, outside of Cambodia, I believe. When I first came here, I interacted with the Hmong a lot more. They do keep to themselves, but they are good people. They work hard. They're not here for handouts, from what I can tell. And they understand the American way, and they like it. Somalis are a whole different animal. The Somalis, you remember Black Hawk Down? In Somalia, when they shot down that helicopter, what did they do? They dragged the American soldiers' bodies through the streets. They dragged their bodies through the streets, firing guns, singing, dancing, celebrating the death of another human being, the humiliation and mutilation of that person's body, just like Hillary Clinton allowed to happen to in Benghazi with our ambassador there. You can watch video of them dragging our ambassador's body through the streets. These people are animals, folks. These are not normal, civilized people. And Minnesota brought countless of them in here. What do you think would happen if we were under attack like that? Do you think all the Somalis would go, oh, gee, now we better become Americans now. We're in this country and we're under attack. We got to work together with all the Americans. Folks, that ain't what would happen. These guys would be setting up little, just like Central Africa now, you would be having warlords setting up shop all over the place. These guys are heavily armed. They don't interact with Americans. They interact with each other. And they would be setting up their own, Mad Max style, I'm in charge, and they'd probably fight between each other, but the Americans would just be sitting back, unable to do anything about it. Now, when the Chinese get here, of course, the Chinese have two options. If they've got all these warlords who are running Minneapolis-St. Paul, which is what you would have, it ain't gonna be Governor Tim Walz in charge, let me put it that way. Okay? When the Chinese get here, they have two options. They can either say, well, the Somalis have this taken over. They are an incredible disruption. They've divided everything. The Americans have to worry about the Somalis, so we might as well just leave it as it is for now because the Somalis are doing our job for them. They're neutralizing the Americans because the Americans are stuck having to deal with these Somali idiots. So we'll go put our resources somewhere else where we have to really fight a battle. The Minnesotans were dumb enough to bring in some of the most barbaric people in the world into this country instead of bringing in, say, more of the Hmong or other people in Africa who, even the Ethiopians, they work for a living at least, and I think they, in many ways, try to integrate and try to be Americans, but the Somalis don't. They don't. Or China could do the other thing. They could say, well, the Somalis have kind of set up an initial organization here. We appreciate it very much. But we're Chinese, and we've said all along that the Chinese are to rule the world. So the Somalis got to go. And all these Somalis who walk around here strutting their stuff because they got a free car and a free house, and if I even look at them funny, they can sue a homeless guy for discrimination and racism. They're going to learn what racism really is, because no one is more racist than the Chinese. How many black people do you see in China? 1.5 billion people. Let me rephrase it. How many black people do you see in China who are architects, doctors, lawyers, elected officials, business leaders, millionaires, billionaires, celebrities, influencers, trendsetters, engineers, astronauts, presidents? How many black people do you see in China who are doing that stuff? Because that's what they're doing over here in the racist United States, because there is no racism in the United States other than these idiots who keep crying racism all the time. The Chinese would either let the Somalis go about their business for now, because it neutralizes the Americans while they can put their resources where it's needed. That is to say, in a city where stupid people did not bring in a bunch of Somalis, where they actually have to fight real red-blooded Americans who are going to stand up and defend themselves. Or they could say, thank you, Somalis, for making sure that Minneapolis-St. Paul was completely neutralized. We're taking over now. And you're dead. And the Somalis will be dead, because the Chinese don't care anything about Somalis. They don't care anything about dark-skinned people. They don't care anything about anyone but the Chinese. Or haven't you figured that one out yet? See, sometimes your eyes help. If you look at China, it's like, oh, hey, they've got like 1/5 of the human population on Earth, and they're all exactly the same. There's no diversity. You'd think people would figure this out, but they don't. And they call Israel racist. Go over to Israel sometimes, folks. You know how racist they are? In their legislature, okay? In their legislature, who wants to wipe out, who keeps saying we want to wipe out the Jews, push them into the ocean so that they no longer exist? We want genocide. The Arabs, they're the ones who keep saying that, right? The Jews allow not only Arabs into Israel, but they are a significant portion in Israel. Arabs have won elections to become the ruling class in their legislature. How racist is that? This is the group that wants to kill all Jews. They want to repeat what Hitler did, but do it fully this time. And yet the Jews are so open-minded that anybody who lives in Israel can run for office, including Arabs. And you're going to call Israel racist? Where do you see that in China? Where do you see Pooh Bear sitting down next to all of his black colleagues? Where do you see that? I don't see it. You see, these people will get a taste of what racism really is when the most racist nation on the world takes over the United States of America. Right now, they are useful idiots. Black Lives Matter, Antifa, all these morons who are trying to divide Americans against each other so that we are weak, divide and conquer. And China could just go from just city hop from one to another. They've got vehicles that work. They've got technology. They know what's going on. They have communications. The Americans are just trying to survive day by day, and they don't even know what's going on. They don't have news. They don't have the internet or their phone. They don't even know what's going on in the world. They don't know if there was a nuclear war that destroyed the whole world. Was it an asteroid collision that hit us? They don't even know. Perhaps weeks or even months later, most Americans won't even know what it was that happened on that day. We're so reliant on technology. Meanwhile, those who do know what happened, the Chinese, are just waltzing in, and with a couple hundred people, they can take over an entire American city. And no one's going to stop them. No one can stop them. And frankly, there's no point to trying to stop them at that point. The American population is dwindling down to almost nothing. Well, it's almost like a giant neutron bomb. By taking out all our infrastructure like that, we can't feed ourselves anymore. Folks, you've got to have food and clean water to survive. You've got to have sanitation so you don't get disease and die. And you're worried about coronavirus, for heaven's sakes? Try sleeping inside your toilet for 6 months and see how well that goes for you. Then you'll know what a disease is. And folks, that's just a scenario off the top of my head. It could go a million different ways. But the point is, because we have people who are not only asleep at the wheel, but they are infiltrators. They are subversives working on behalf of a foreign power. And the people of Minnesota voted them into office. Because we have that, China could. I'm not saying they will. I'm not saying they're going to. China can, in one day, destroy the United States of America without suffering any blowback or retribution against the entire Chinese mainland. 1 year ago, that could not be said. Because on the one hand, China would not have been able to take us over and destroy us that easily in the first place, because we had someone who cared about defending the country. But also, he would have retaliated. It's like, you want to destroy the United States of America? Okay, Beijing is going to become a bowl of dust. But that's not the way it is anymore. In part because the people of Minnesota voted, they wanted to replace Donald Trump with this mask that Barack Obama and the Clintons are wearing. This old man mask. And that little Valley Girl mask. In my 50 existential threats to America, I never got to go in detail over immigration, which was one of the threats to America. Let me briefly talk about that. Very briefly. Legal immigration is how my ancestors got here, and probably yours, probably. The thing with legal immigration is that people come into the country, we evaluate them, okay? Are they coming in here with AIDS and tuberculosis, and they have no skills and no education? Come on in! Or is it someone who's healthy, and they work hard, and they have a family, and they have values, That's the kind of people you want in your country. Just like you want your children to marry a good person, not a piece of garbage. Hopefully. Right? As a nation, you want to bring people into your family, people who are going to be competent citizens. They're not going to come in here and try to kill you and rape you. They're going to come in here and join you. That's why there's a vetting process for who gets in the country. Any rational country does that. You don't just open the door and say, come on in, and whoever comes in, they can have every disease in the world. You can just open the doors to this country's prison and build a tunnel from there to our gates and flood them in here. Nobody knows because it's illegal. There's no vetting at all. There's no tracking of these people. With legal immigration, not only do you determine that the people coming in are going to be reasonably good people to have here, but they have requirements to become a citizen. Before they can vote, before they can benefit from the rights of citizenship in this country, they have to understand what those rights are. They have to study the Constitution. They have to study American history. They have to learn the language. They must learn English so they can communicate with their fellow Americans. How do you have a country if you can't? How do you have a family where you've got a family of 4 people? They speak only Chinese, only English, only Italian, and only Danish. How in the world can that family get anything done? They can't even talk to each other. The requirements to become a citizen were to learn the language, learn the history of this country, learn the values, learn what the Constitution says and why it is so important that you defend that Constitution with your very life. And then take a pledge of allegiance to that. And if you do that, we welcome you with open arms. It doesn't matter if you're black, if you're Asian, it doesn't matter if you're young or if you're old. You don't have to have a PhD. You can just be a hardworking person who had to drop out of high school. But you're not going to be a complete idiot. You're not going to be some BS crazy loon bird who's been in prison since they were 6 years old, like a lot of these Central American prisons are dumping in on us, or a bunch of gang members. And we know who they are, so we understand what the makeup of our country is, and that allows people who do administration, which is what government's supposed to do their job. But if you don't know who's in the country and you've got millions and millions and millions of people coming in, we don't know who they are, we don't know where they are, they can't speak the language, they can't communicate with Americans, they've never even been told that the Constitution exists, let alone understand anything about it. What is their allegiance to? There's nothing to have allegiance to for these people. So by flooding this country with all these illegal immigrants and spreading them, that's why they're doing this. They're spreading them around the country. They're not just keeping them all in the desert Southwest. They're being spread among, why? Because if something happens like that, where say China wants to take over, the Americans cannot depend on those illegal immigrants because they don't even know what they're standing up for. They're going to look after number one. They're not going to look after you out of gratitude that you let them into the country. Why would they do that? They don't even know who George Washington is. They don't know who King George was. They don't know what the word tyranny means. They've probably experienced something pretty oppressive in their former country, but they don't even understand what's going on. That's the problem with illegal immigration. No rational country in the world has ever allowed something like that. It's suicidal. It's absolute suicide. I mean, just try to imagine, again, go back to the family analogy. Let's say you have 3 children. Okay? You and your spouse, you have 3 children. They're growing up. You're teaching them values. You're teaching them a work ethic. They're learning reading, writing, and arithmetic. They're getting smarter. They seem to be pretty responsible. They're good kids. And you can see how your family is doing a good job. Your kids, you want them to marry good people who are also good and who have a good work ethic and are honest. So they're not going to be going to jail. They're not going to be going off to prison and all that, doing crimes. And then they have children, and they raise their children the same way. And over time, you build a dynasty of your family name, of your blood, all these good people who are relatively well educated, generally pretty smart, hardworking, not troublemakers, just a good family. That's what you supposedly want. But let's go back to the beginning. You've got your 3 kids that you're raising, and instead, when they get to be, 14 years old, you force them at gunpoint. Okay, let's say you have 2 daughters and a son. Okay, daughter number 1, you're going to marry this guy from Azerbaijan. Okay, he's Muslim, he doesn't speak English. Because he's Muslim, he now has complete control over your life. Put a burqa on and do whatever this guy says, even though you can't understand what he says. He may kill you if you disobey him, even if you didn't understand what he was telling you to do. That's daughter number 1. Daughter number 2, let's see here. Who can we get for you? How about this? We're going to go to the Amazon. We're going to go find one of those tribes where they're still using spears and all that. We're going to grab this guy. That's going to be your husband. He doesn't speak the language either, so you can't communicate with him. We don't really know what this guy's going to do. He might be a cannibal. He might eat you, in which case your part of the family line just disappears. We don't really know because we can't talk to him. He doesn't speak English. Son, come here. Okay? Here's what we're going to get for you. We're going to get you the ugliest whore we can find in an Italian, military whorehouse. Here, let's bring her over here. She doesn't speak English, so you can't really talk to her. She's going to cheat on you for your whole life. She's going to make you absolutely miserable. She might pump out some babies, though, so we can keep the line going. Okay, now if you do that to your kids because you're not vetting anything, you're not paying attention to who they're marrying, you're not paying attention to who comes in to your family, what the quality of these people are, then the family that you had in the first place, where you were doing a really good job by administering your family becomes a dynasty of good, wonderful citizens who contribute and make this country a great place. But if you just open the floodgates to every Tom, Dick, and Harry who wants to come in, and without you doing anything about it, they can just come in and take over your child. Like the Muslim who comes in and takes over your daughter, and now he owns your daughter as a piece of property, and you don't raise a finger about it. That's the equivalent of opening up the floodgates to your country. Which one of those families is headed in a good direction, and which one is headed for extinction? You don't have to think all that much to figure out the problem with illegal immigration. And with that, I'm going to stop this video because I could just go on forever. Folks, China has successfully tested a hypersonic missile, a first strike nuclear weapon. That's the only purpose for it. It's an offensive weapon. Doesn't mean they're going to use it, but it means they have it, and they can use it if they want to. And our people who call themselves woke, but they are the definition of asleep, didn't even know the Chinese had the ability to do it. And the irony of it all is, the Chinese did it using our technology that the Clintons have given to them over the last 30 years. Because as the Clintons sent all of our economy and all of our manufacturing and everything overseas there, China, you got to sign this agreement. You got to give us all your designs, your patents, your information. We need to have all the designs so we can go out and reproduce it ourselves illegally and improve upon it. Our ancestors did all the work. The reason these cell phones exist is because there were materials scientists who learned how to build plastic, which didn't exist 100 years ago. There were people who studied electricity and electronics. There were people who studied computer programming. They built computers when there were no computers 100 years ago. Our ancestors did all that work. There were mathematicians. There were chemists, physicists, business people who made it possible to coordinate all this to build a cell phone. That's why we have cell phones, is because our ancestors, not the Chinese people's ancestors, our ancestors did all the work. And in 30 years, China just takes it and send their people over here to our schools, and then they go back to China and they improve upon it. We did all the work, and now they get to take over the world, and they get to build a missile that we may not even have. Hypersonic, nuclear-capable missile. And to bring all this back home, the reason I'm making this video to tell you about it is because the Star Tribune and the Pioneer Press and Care 11 and all these news agencies that are part of the problem, telling lies and withholding truths, at least as of today, they haven't bothered to tell you about this. Well, now the homeless guy has told you about it. And the irony is, you're going to pay those guys. I'm not going to get any benefit. I don't get any donations. I don't get any help for telling you these things. But there's people out there paying subscriptions to the Star Tribune so that they can receive this bag of lies every single day on their doorstep. There's people who go out there and they patronize the advertisers of Care 11 and Fox News 9 and Pioneer Press and Star Tribune. You patronize their advertisers, which helps make these media companies money, instead of boycotting them and saying, I'm not going to buy your product until either you stop advertising in the Star Tribune, which lies, or until they stop lying. But you won't do that. So you are giving your money, you are supporting so that the head of the Star Tribune can sleep in a nice warm bed tonight, and yet I'm the one here telling you the truth, and I'm not going to get anything for it, am I? I'm done talking for today. Thanks for watching.